I'm going to start explaining a little bit about the DataSnap server. After that, we're going to see client in Delphi, in C++, in FireMonkey, PHP client, and .NET client using ASP.NET in Prisma. So my first project is my DataSnap server, which I created using the DataSnap wizard. I created this server using the DataSnap server, and I enabled the TCP/IP and HTTP protocol. I have a nice UI here. There is some server login, some information about the server. And I have the server container, which is my main instance for the server. It's a data module here. And I have my DataSnap server, which is a DS server. And I enable the TCP/IP and the HTTP protocol. You have the TCP server transporter. You define the port you want to work. If you want to enable filter for this specific protocol, you just come here and add the filters you want. Okay, you have a filter zlib compression to compress the data. You can do encryption with PC1 and RSA. And you can do the same here with HTTP servers, which is the HTTP protocol that you're going to enable on your server. So in this case, I'm using port 8010. You can enable different filters for this specific connection. So you can work with these two protocols in DataSnap, and also you can host your application using HTTPS as well. First step is define the protocols you want to use, define what level of authentication you want for your application. In this case, DataSnap provided a DS Authentication Manager component. And this component, when you associate the HTTP with the Authentication Manager or the TCP with the Authentication Manager, you enable authentication on your server. So at the moment anyone tries to connect and execute the server method, the Authentication Manager will check if this person is a valid user and if he is authorized to execute one of the server methods. This process to check the authentication happen on user authenticate event, as you can see here. And as an example, I create this T-user class to validate the username and password that I receive on this method. I just pass valid for this reference variable here, if it's true or false. In case I define as a false, that's going to return an exception to the client side, say you are not allowed to execute, to connect in the server. Another important aspect here is at the moment you define if the user is valid. In this case, I'm saying if the user is admin, I'm going to add the user on the admin role. If everybody else is going to be part of the user role. I'm doing that because I can control what methods can be executed or what class can be accessed by the user. And the way how DataSnap control that is using a role mechanism. So let's say as example here, I have a roles property, and I say let's define a role to these two methods, T-user enable user and T-user disable user. It means only admin role can execute this method, and only and the user role is going to be denied. So in this case, at the moment somebody tries to execute this method, the DataSnap automatically is going to consider that here. Or in case you don't want to use the DataSnap mechanism, you can come here on the user authorized. Every time he tries to execute some of the methods, you can check here. You have all the information through the authorized event object. You can see the username, what roles he is part, and you can see if he's authorized or not to execute this method. So at the moment you have your server set up like this, you start building, you start creating business logics on your server. So it's, in this case, we define that as a server class, which contain a number of different methods that we call server methods. When you implement your server methods on the server side, there are different ways you can do that. The first one is creating just a class. Let's say I have this class here, department, and I want to expose this class comes inherit from base server class, which is a class that inherit from T-persistent. All of the class you want to expose as server method need at some point inherit from T-persistent. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to expose this class. So in this case here, I said tDepartment, I need to enable, turn on the method info directive. It's required for DateSnap, otherwise DateSnap cannot, the RTTI cannot go through the public methods and expose these public methods. In this case, I need to turn on here. I have a number of different methods, and all of these methods, public methods, is going to be exposed to the client side. In case you want to expose a data module, the best way to do that is to create a server module, which is a data module, and I have here a number of different data modules here. Well, let's say the data set DM1, and this is a data module which descends from TDS server module. When you look here, it comes from server module base. At the end, here is a provided data module. You not only expose the server methods, but you expose as well all of your dataset providers to the client side. But to expose this class, all of your class you have, you need to register and publish this class. For each class, let's say for the department, I have this DS department here. And on the event on that class, I pass my tDepartment as a persistent class. At the moment I do that, this class is exposed to the client side. Anyone that's authenticated on the server can execute the methods on this for this class. Also, the lifecycle is responsible to control the lifecycle of the object on the server side. And here we work with 3 different lifecycles. The first one is the invocation, that every time you execute one method, DateSnap is going to create the class you register here, in this case TUser, execute and destroy the class. So you don't keep instance of this class on the server side. The other one is the server, which means you only have one instance of this class on the server, and this is pretty good if you want to implement a pool of objects, because you can have a control. So there is a few events here, on create instance, on destroy instance. What happened here is I call a method on this class, it's going to create the instance and keep the instance on the server. If another client try to execute a different method or the same method for this class, DateSnap is just going to get the instance on the server and do whatever have to do and return the result. In case you want to create a pool of objects, you can implement the onCreate instance event and define if the object exists, if you have a collection of objects in the server, search for the object and decide if the object's there, you just return an instance. If it's not, you create a new one. So, and also you implement the onDestroy here. And the other one, which is used in general, let's say the DM dataset one, which is my data model on the server, contain a number of different providers. It's the session. So you have an instance of this object for every single client. The instance per client don't talk with instance from another client. So this is the concept, the traditional concept of session here. And in case you have provider, that's recommended you use session here. So let's run the server here. I have a connection open for 211 in 8010 through HTTP. Okay, and let's go and see how things work here on the client side. I have this Delphi client, which uses a remote control interface, and I have a login where I pass the username and password. And at the moment I want to pass this information to the server, I just use a data module on the client side, which has a SQL connection, and I pass the information here in runtime, the host name, the port, the DateSnap authentication user, and the DateSnap authentication password if my server required a username. When you go here on the client side, you want to have access to all of the methods available on the server side. You can use the server method component, simple, just connect with your SQL connection, and you can get all of the class dot the name of the method available on the server side. So let's say you want to add a user. I have the method user add user, and I pass the first last name, the login, and password. If I can open the connection, I got this exception for the server side saying remote error. In this case, it rejected my credentials because admin and the password I use is not the valid password. So let's now use the correct password, and this is going to work. Here we go. So I'm connected, authenticated on the server. So no problem here so far. You can see here that I can access a data set. In this case, I'm using a client data set. Let's take a look how I get the information from data set here. In this case, on the client side, I have a client data set and a provider connection. The provider connection connects with my server through the SQL server on the client side. I pass the name of the client, the class on the server, and I connect the client data set with the provider connection using the remote server property here. When you do that and you list the provider name here, you will receive the list of providers available on this class on the server side. In this case, on the dataset one, I only have one provider there. So let's go back here on the, but let's take a look and see this case here on the DM dataset tree, which is a master detail I'm using. And as you can see, I have a provider connection connected with the DM dataset tree. When I come here on the provider, you see the 5 different providers available on the server side listed here on the client side. Let's take a look in this case, because this case is a really common question. It's how I use master detail, and I change a number of different records, delete, update, insert, and I want to apply all the changes through one single transaction on the server side. The way how you do that, it's on the server side, I want to know the budget per project and what employees are working on each project. When you look at this application in action, you see here the project. Take a look. For each project, I have here the budget per project and per department, and then the employees here. So let's say you can do like add a new record here. I can define the budget, for example. I can change this record. I can add another one, and I can change this field here. So you can see I make several changes, and when I apply, in this case here I'm getting an error. This error is generated by a trigger on the server side that's saying the project budget value cannot be accepted. I can cancel all of the updates and nothing's gonna be saved on my database. I can fix the value and apply again. It means you can control every single record you send on this single apply and decide what to do with each one of them. How to make this thing happen? How to make the DataSnap work in this way? So because when I did the apply here, I just applied the CDS. What I did in this case was on the data model on my server side, I add my query for the project using the SQL dataset, a simple query on the project table. Define a provider for this one, and I define a data source. Why I use this data source on the server side? Because the query budget and the query employee will have a SQL, but they need to filter what project they want to bring the information. Defining the data source here on the server side, tell the SQL dataset component to get the project ID from the SQL project query here. On the client side, when you define these 2 queries here as a nested query, you just come here and add the T fields. So you have the 2 queries here. That's how you're going to use the data for this specific query. I define a client data set, define the remote server as my dsprov DM tree, which has the dataset tree, which is my class on the server side. The subqueries doesn't require a provider because the provider is only one. So you just come here, since the query is a data set on the client dataset project, you just define the dataset field for this query. So when I change a record here, it updates the 2 nested query for you. And when you apply only on the client dataset. So you see there is a relationship here between all of the queries. Another way to do that is pass a number of parameters to a server method and start the transaction manually on the server, do all the changes, and commit the information. But in this case, you are doing the manual step. Here is automatically, it's optimized. client data set know what chains you have on the client data set. He's going to pass the delta to the server and is going to execute and update the information. Another way you have to exchange data with your server is using DBX header. The DBX header is a low-level cursor in DB Express framework. It's a unidirectional, and you can use as well to implement cache on the client side or on the server side. So when I execute some DataSnap client application, I can, for example, get the list of department. In this demonstration here, I receive a DBX header, and I copy this DBX header on the client side to a client data set. When you go here on the server, what I did, I have this class department, and I have the method get order by departments order by TDBX header. What it does is just prepare the query using here creating a command. It set the order by. In this case, I pass select stuff from department. I prepare the query if the query is not prepared. And when I use execute query, I return here the DBX header. On the client side, I'm using the proxy class generated previously by DataSnap. I get an instance of the class. Here I have the method get departments order by. So I capture this DBX header, and on the DBX dataset header, we have a method copy header to client dataset. You just need to pass the header in the client dataset. When you do that, in this case, I associate the data source with this client dataset. I have the information here on my DB grid. Let me show you a C++ builder client. I have here the login information, which is the same. I pass the parameters here. I have the same components, the provider connection. Also, I have here my form, which I have a number of different tabs, and I can request that information here from the server as well. So I'm execute different server methods here. So if I execute this C++ application, I can execute like methods on the server. Look, the master detail, the same we have here. Now in C++, I can use VCL styles to change the look and feel of this application. As you can see, I have my FireMonkey application. I'm getting the customer information from the server. I'm connected with the data set. I just grab the customer information, which has a data set provider, DSP employee, using live binds to connect the data. And I have a login form here as well, which goes on the server side and executes, try to connect on your DataSnap server. When you look here, I have a SQL connection on my FireMonkey application. Let's execute this application as the same way I can do with the VCL. So I'm using here some of the nice effects in FireMonkey. For example, this information is required, so I just come here and connect. Here's my FireMonkey application running on Windows. It's a 64-bit Windows application. I can make change here on the data I can update to the server side. If I want to run this application on Mac, I can just switch. Here's my client in Mac. Let's pass this IP address. And that's my application run on Mac OS X and getting the data from the DataSnap server. I just use, in this case, to identify, I'm using some 3D components here. In order to identify what platform I'm using, I just use the TOS version class from Delphi RTL, and I can capture what's the name of the OS I'm running, the architecture, the platform. RAD PHP allows you to create the proxy class as well. You just need to use the DataSnap REST client module, pass the protocol, the language you want to create. Maybe you want to use JavaScript instead of PHP. You can use here, pass the host port, and also the username and password, because in this case, if the server has authentication, you need to pass the authentication. The moment you do that, okay, DataSnap create a data module in PHP, which has the component, the SREST connection. All of the communication between PHP and DataSnap server goes through REST interface, and I have to pass the name and password that's going to be executing this request, the information to the server through this component. This data module has some class helper that allows you to access directly the server methods instead to instantiate the class. If you want to return a department class, you just have to create the read department client method, and it will return an instance of tDepartment for you. So as you can see here, there's a new tDepartment that passes REST connection. So you don't need to instantiate the REST connection and ask for a tDepartment. That's a helper here in the proxy. But if you want to go directly to the client proxy, you can use the client proxy unit that's generated as well. But in this case, you have to instantiate the REST connection and then create an instance of the method. All of the methods I have on the server here, for example, return tCustomer has a function customer here, and so on. Let's start from the beginning with this login PHP page here. And what I do is I just grab the information from connection info from my DS REST connection, which is in my data module, and I instantiate a TUser. TUser is a class, has a number of different methods. You see, add user, is valid user, the parameters, everything in PHP. I use this method to check if the user is valid or not. If the user is valid, after that I can pass, in this case through the connection info, the username and password, and I don't need to validate this stuff again. So in case there is valid user, execute and return me something, always you're going to get a DS object. And if you have an instance of DS object has a property result, and then in this case is valid user return a Boolean type, and then if the result is true, I can move forward to the next page. Invalid user, I got a username and password invalid, but if I pass a correct username and password, so I'm authenticated. So I have another page here which is the list of department. What this method is doing here is execute the method get departments ordered by. I present this information through the PHP page. Let's see here the department page. In this case, I use the helper class. So instead, I don't need to instantiate the class. I can just use, like in this case, read department client. Because read department client, as I mentioned before, automatically instantiate the tDepartment. So it makes a little easier for me to write less code. And I execute here the method get departments ordered by. In this case, when you use that, remember I execute that through the Data Explorer and I got a DBX header. Since I'm using a REST connection, I'm getting a JSON object here. And when I get a JSON object, I have a result property, which is the table, that is the name of the columns. And after that, I have the result. I have an array for each column. So I have the column department, which is the name of the field on my table. So then I interact through this array, and then I present that here. I have here my Prisma application. So it's ASP.NET application. And in this case, we provide the DateSnap DBX driver for .NET. So we don't need to go through REST. You can just use the DB Express driver in .NET. Let me show you the login. I instantiate a TADO DBX connection. I try to open the connection, passing the username and password. My server is going to authenticate it. You get the connection, instantiate the department client, execute the get departments order by, and you do a typecast of your DBX header to a DB data header. DateSnap use the native type on .NET to help you to manipulate the information. In this case, I'm getting the information by type for the column 0. I can use getName here to get values as well and pass the name of the column, not the position. Okay, in this case, I just use the position. So when I run this, I have here a username and password. If I pass an incorrect username and password, I'm going to get the same exception I got on the native client, so authentication reject. Now it's authorized. So if I want to return a DBX header, so I have here the information as well. And also you can return a DBX header as a SQL data source. You can use a grid view. In this case, what's happening here is I got a departments order by. Okay, I pass the class, the name of the method, to a SQL data source, which is the native type in .NET. and I just associate the return I have to the grid view. I can use the native types on .NET Platform to interact with the DateSnap server. So this is some of the things you can do and the flexibility that DateSnap provides to you on the .NET side. On the Delphi side, but there is a component, the sproxy generator, which allow your application to generate the client class in different language through the writer property. In each language and platform, I want to generate the proxy class for my application.